When my wife and I first moved into Maple Hollow, we thought we'd finally found peace. Quiet streets, tall oaks leaning over the sidewalks, neighbors who waved from their porches as we unloaded boxes. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids still rode bikes after dark and people left their doors unlocked. Our house sat right across from an old Victorian. 2 stories, sagging porch, chipped blue paint, and shutters that hung crooked like tired eyes. The realtor told us it had been empty for years, ever since the woman who owned it died alone. I didn't think much of it then. Every street in America has one of those houses haunted not by spirits, but by the slow rot of time. The first night, my wife woke me around 3 in the morning. She was sitting up in bed, clutching the blanket, her face pale in the glow of the digital clock. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing toward the window. I followed her finger. Across the street, behind the dusty upstairs glass of that abandoned Victorian, someone was standing there. An old woman. Her outline was faint, but the shape was unmistakable. Thin shoulders, wispy hair, a long white nightgown that caught the moonlight. She wasn't moving, just staring out, directly toward our house. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. But the longer I looked, the clearer she became. There was no question someone was there. We called the police. An officer came out, looked around the place, and told us it was sealed tight. He said it was probably a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from a street lamp. But even after he drove off, I glanced through our bedroom window one more time, and she was still there, framed in the glass, motionless. The next night, we stayed up. I set an alarm for 2:55 a.m. We sat in the dark, side by side, waiting, and right on the hour, she appeared again. The same place, the same stillness. Only this time, her head turned slightly, as if she knew we were watching her back. I felt something cold and heavy spread through the room, like the air itself had thickened. My wife grabbed my arm. She's looking at us. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she turned away. The next morning, I talked to some of the neighbors. Most just smiled politely, probably thinking we were sleep-deprived or paranoid. But one older man, Mr. Dalton, who lived 2 doors down, didn't smile. He just stared at me and said softly, "You've seen her, haven't you?" He told me her name was Agnes Whitmore. She'd lived in that house for over 50 years. After her husband died, she was never the same. Every night, she'd sit in that window, waiting for him to come home. When winter came, she caught pneumonia. The mailman found her weeks later, still in that chair, facing the window. No one ever moved in after that. By the time he finished talking, my skin was crawling. I told myself it was just a story, but part of me needed to know for sure. A week later, just before sunset, I went into the house. The side door was half open. The air inside was stale, damp with the smell of decay. Every step creaked like the place was groaning in pain. I climbed the stairs, my flashlight cutting through the dark dust swirling in the beam. Her room was just as he'd described: floral wallpaper curling off the walls, an old iron bed frame, and a rocking chair facing the window. I was about to leave when I noticed the floor. There were photographs scattered everywhere, hundreds of them, all black and white, all taken from that same window, each one showing the street outside, the houses, the cars, and in some of the newer ones, I could see my own home across the street. Some of the photos were dated just weeks before we moved in. My flashlight flickered. The air turned colder. I could see my breath, and then the rocking chair began to move, slowly, back and forth, back and forth. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. That night, the knocking started. 3 taps on the wall, always at 3 a.m. Sometimes it came from the ceiling, sometimes from behind the walls themselves. The baby monitor in our daughter's room would crackle to life, playing faint whispers, or the soft, off-key hum of an old lullaby. And every night, when I looked out the window, she was there again, closer now. Sometimes, Her hand was pressed against the glass. One night, I recorded her. When I played it back, the window was empty. But in the reflection, behind me, there was a faint face. Wrinkled, hollow-eyed, smiling. A month later, I woke to the sound of our front door creaking open. I ran downstairs, thinking it was an intruder, but when I reached the porch, the street was empty, except for her. She was standing at the edge of our yard, bare feet on the wet grass, her white gown fluttering in the wind. She looked right at me and smiled a slow, knowing smile. Then she turned and walked back across the street into the old Victorian, disappearing through the locked door as if the walls had never been there. We moved out 3 days later. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I check the real estate listing for that house. It's still empty. But every so often, when new photos are uploaded, I notice something in the upstairs window, just faint enough to doubt, but clear enough to make my stomach turn. A woman's silhouette, always standing in the same place, always watching. It started a few weeks after I moved into the house on the edge of Hollow Creek. A small, quiet place tucked behind a line of old sycamore trees, overlooking a pond that always looked gray, no matter the weather. I'd bought it after my divorce, cheap, peaceful, far from the noise of the city. I thought it would be a good place to start over. The first morning I noticed the footprints, I was half asleep, clutching a mug of coffee, and just happened to glance down at the porch steps. Muddy prints, small ones, like a child's bare feet, ran from the edge of the porch to my front door. At first, I assumed it was a neighborhood kid, maybe wandering too close after playing near the water. I didn't think much of it. I hosed off the porch and went on with my day. But the next morning, they were back. Same small, bare footprints, fresh mud, and it hadn't even rained that night. By the third morning, I started to feel uneasy. The prints weren't just at the steps anymore. They circled the porch, stopped at the swing, and then they stopped right in front of my door. 2 small feet, pointed inward, like someone had stood there, waiting. I locked my door that night. It's funny how quickly peace turns to tension when you start noticing patterns. For a week straight, those footprints appeared every morning, always damp, always ending at my front door. I set up a motion light, even installed a camera above the porch, one of those cheap battery ones that sends an alert to your phone. That night, I lay in bed, waiting for the chime that meant movement had been detected. But nothing came. No lights, no alert. When I woke up at sunrise and checked, the prints were there again. The mud on the porch glistened wet, and the swing was slightly turned, creaking softly in the morning air. I opened the app, scrolled through the footage. The camera showed nothing but the porch still, quiet, empty all night long. No shadows, no movement, no one stepping into frame. But somehow, those prints kept coming back. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Grover, an older woman who'd lived next door for 40 years. She was the kind of person who knew everyone's history, every divorce, every death, every whispered rumor. I laughed nervously when I told her about it, expecting her to say some raccoon or stray dog was making the mess. Instead, her face went pale. "Oh," she said softly. "The little boy's back." I frowned. "What boy?" She hesitated, then nodded toward the pond. "That one out there. His name was Eli. Drowned in that water about 10 years ago. Used to come to this street all the time. Sweet boy. His mama would bake cookies, and he'd run house to house, knocking on doors, seeing who'd share." I didn't know what to say. I looked toward the pond. The surface was still, but something about it felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me flinch, the branches tapping the window, the faint slosh of water from the pond. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard soft footsteps on the porch. Light, quick, and small. I sat up, heart hammering, and stared at the door. The knob didn't move, but the sound was unmistakable. A few light steps, and then the gentle squeak of the swing moving. I didn't open the door. When dawn broke, I went outside. The prints were there again, but this time, there was something else. Right on the porch rail, next to the swing, sat a small, smooth pebble, and next to it, a single waterlogged cookie. I froze. I hadn't baked anything. I hadn't left food out. I picked up the pebble. It was cold and slick, like it had just come from the bottom of the pond. That was the first time I felt the air changing. The faint, earthy smell of pond water mixed with something sweet. The smell of cookies. That night, I brought the camera inside. Whatever was happening, it wasn't catching it. I stayed awake, sitting on the couch with the lights off, listening. At 2:58 a.m., the porch swing creaked. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. The sound wasn't rhythmic like the wind. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was sitting there, rocking back and forth. Then I heard it, a faint knock, not hard, not urgent. Just a gentle 3-tap knock on the front door. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. The knocking came again. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. I must have sat there for 10 minutes before I got the courage to move. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing but the night. The air was damp, cold. The smell of mud and cookies was stronger now. The next morning, the prints were there again, but smaller this time. Sharper. Like the feet had been pressed harder into the wood. And this time, they led away from the porch, all the way down to the pond. I followed them slowly, each step crunching in the frost. The pond's surface was covered in a thin layer of mist. The prints stopped at the edge of the water. I stood there, staring. The mist swirled, thickening near the center of the pond. And just for a moment, I thought I saw something, a small head breaking the surface, hair plastered to the side of a pale face. Then it was gone. The next night, I baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies. I don't know why. Maybe part of me felt sorry for him. Maybe I wanted it to stop. I set one on a plate by the door before going to bed. At 3:02 a.m., the knocking came again. Soft, careful. I didn't answer. But in the silence that followed, I heard the faint sound of a small hand picking up the plate. Then footsteps retreating. When I opened the door in the morning, the plate was empty clean, as if someone had licked it spotless. The footprints were gone. It was the first morning in weeks the porch was clean. No mud, no mess. I almost convinced myself it was over. Until the following night, when I woke up to a sound that froze me completely. A quiet laugh. A child's laugh. It came from the porch right outside my window. Slowly, I got up and looked through the curtain. The swing was moving again, just a little, the chain creaking softly. On it sat the faint outline of a small boy. I could see his wet hair glint in the porch light. He was looking down at something in his hands, a cookie, and then he looked up. His face was pale and swollen, his eyes cloudy like glass marbles. Mud clung to his arms and neck. He smiled at me through the window. Crumbs stuck to his lips before fading into the air like smoke. The swing stopped. The porch went still. I moved out 2 weeks later. The new couple who bought the house stopped me in town a few months later. They laughed, saying their little girl kept waking up in the night, talking to someone she called Eli. She said he comes to the porch sometimes, says he misses the lady who used to bake cookies, and that he's not lonely anymore. It started with a sound, a steady, rhythmic thunk, 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 echoing through the stillness of the night. At first, I thought it was just part of the renovation. The house next door had been under construction for months, boards piled on the lawn, scaffolding along the side, one of those blue tarps snapping in the wind. The place had been empty since I moved in. The contractor said they were restoring it for resale. So when I heard hammering late one night, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone was just finishing a project after hours, but then it happened again. It was 2:37 a.m. when I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The hammering was clear this time. Thunk, thunk, pause, thunk, thunk. Always the same pattern. Slow, deliberate. The strange thing was, it didn't sound like normal construction work. It wasn't the quick rhythm of a nail gun or someone building something. It sounded heavier, older, like someone swinging by hand, each strike echoing with that dull, hollow weight of old wood taking punishment. By the third night, curiosity turned into unease. I stepped out onto my porch around 3 a.m, robe pulled tight against the cold. The air was still, no wind, no traffic. Just that sound. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It came from the second floor of the house next door, the far right room, the one with the half-boarded window. I could see a faint flicker of light inside, just enough to cast a shadow across the curtain. The shadow moved, slow and steady, arm lifting, dropping. Someone was in there. I went back inside and called the property manager's number listed on the construction sign out front. No answer. Just voicemail. The next morning, I drove by the site when the crew was supposed to be there. Only 2 men were working, both outside repairing siding. I told them I'd heard someone working inside around 3 a.m. They looked at each other, confused. "Inside," one of them repeated. "We haven't been in that place for weeks, man. Power's been cut off since June." He pointed to the breaker box, the lock still rusted shut. "Nobody's working there. Not us, not anyone." I must have looked unsettled, because the other man leaned in a little and said, "You're in the old Raymond house, right?" I nodded. "Then maybe you heard him," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Old man who owned that place used to do carpentry, built most of the inside himself. After his wife passed, he started fixing the upstairs bedroom, said he wanted to make it right for her. Found him a few months later hanging from a beam in that same room. Ropes snapped the ceiling joist clean through. Guess he never finished his work." I just stood there, the morning sun suddenly feeling too bright, too harsh. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept telling myself what I'd heard before must have been kids or an animal. My bedroom window faced that house. I drew the curtains shut, but around 2:40 a.m., I heard it again. Thunk, 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 thunk. This time, I saw something through the crack in the curtain. A single light flickering in that upstairs window. And then, movement. A shadow crossing slowly back and forth, stopping at intervals, arm lifting and falling, just like before. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The light was faint, the camera barely catching it, but the sound was there, clear as day. When I zoomed in, I froze. For a split second, the shadow paused mid-swing. Then it turned toward my window. The shape didn't look quite right. The head was tilted too far to one side. I shut the curtains and didn't look again. The next morning, I played the video back, but the audio was gone nothing but static. The video showed the house in total darkness. No light, no shadow, nothing. I called the contractor again that afternoon, finally reaching him. When I told him about the noises, he got quiet. "That room's locked," he said. "Padlock's been there since we found the mess. We don't touch it." I asked what he meant by the mess. He hesitated, then sighed. "When the old man, you know, he used the beam that runs through that room, the one he'd been reinforcing. There were bloodstains from when the joist cracked. Took us weeks to clean it up. Even now, no one likes going up there. Says it feels wrong." I didn't tell him about the hammering. He already sounded uneasy. That night, I slept with earplugs in. Didn't matter. Around 3 a.m., even through the foam, I felt the vibrations. Each hammer strike seemed to rattle the air itself. It wasn't just a sound, it had weight. It felt like something was hitting the wall between our houses. I got up, went outside again. The neighborhood was silent, moonlight spilling over the roofs. But when I turned toward that house, I froze. The upstairs window was open. The curtain inside moved slowly, like breathing. Then I saw him, a figure standing behind the glass, motionless. The shape of a man, head tilted at that same unnatural angle. His right arm hung stiffly at his side, while the left held something long and narrow. It wasn't until the curtain shifted that I realized it was a hammer. I took a step back. My porch light flickered, buzzed, then went out completely. The hammering started again, louder, this time faster. Thunk, 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 thunk. Like someone was pounding with desperate force. Not building, but trying to break free. And then silence. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at that window. Long enough for the wind to start moving again. Long enough for the night to start feeling alive. When I finally went inside, my hands were trembling. The next morning, I noticed something new. On my side of the property line, right where the two houses nearly touched, there were marks on the wood siding. Indentations, like hammer strikes. I haven't slept much since. I keep the blinds closed, and the porch light stays on all night. The renovation crew doesn't come anymore. They quit the project entirely. The contractor told me over the phone that he hired a new team to clean out the upstairs. Said they found something strange. The old beam the man had hanged himself from it had been replaced once. But when they tore it out, they found words carved into the wood underneath. Still fixing it. The same words the neighbor said the man had repeated to everyone before he died. It's been months since anyone's worked in that house. But every so often, around 3 a.m, I still wake to that sound. Soft at first, then louder. Thunk, 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 thunk. And sometimes, if I listen long enough, I can hear the faint creak of rope tightening between each strike. When we first moved into that little duplex on Franklin Street, it felt like the perfect place to start over. Quiet neighborhood, a fenced backyard for our dog, and just one shared wall with the other side of the house. It was old, but charming hardwood floors that creaked under your steps, brass doorknobs worn smooth by time, and that faint smell of dust and old paint that all old homes seem to carry. My wife loved it instantly. I did too, until the knocking started. It was subtle at first, just a light tap coming from the shared wall that separated our living room from the neighbors. The kind of sound you'd expect from pipes cooling down, or maybe an old beam settling. Nothing alarming, but one evening, while hanging some photos, I tapped the wall with my knuckle 3 short raps. A second later, 3 identical knocks came back. I froze. I looked at my wife, who was halfway through unpacking books. "Did you hear that?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe they're just being funny." That's what we told ourselves. That the neighbor, an older woman we hadn't yet met, was just playing around. Maybe it was her way of saying hello. But when it happened again, it didn't feel playful. It was late, maybe close to midnight. We were watching TV when a sudden knock came from the wall. Just once. Sharp, hollow. I turned down the volume and listened. Another knock followed 2, then 3. I got up, walked over, and tapped back. The same rhythm answered instantly. That was the first time I felt the air shift. It's hard to explain, but the moment those knocks came back, the room felt smaller, heavier, like something invisible had stepped into it. I knocked again, slow this time. 1, 2, pause. The wall responded the same way. My wife told me to stop. She said it was creeping her out. I agreed, but part of me couldn't let it go. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or that stubborn human need to understand what shouldn't be possible. The next morning, I saw the woman next door outside watering her plants. Thin, gray hair, wearing an old cardigan despite the warm weather. She looked kind, but tired, like someone who hadn't slept well in years. I introduced myself and mentioned the knocking, trying to make it sound casual. She went still. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she said softly, "Oh, so you hear him too?" I laughed awkwardly. "You mean your husband?" Her face broke into a sad smile. "Yes," she whispered. "My late husband. We used to talk that way after he passed. just little knocks. It was how we kept each other close. She said it so calmly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Before I could say anything, she added, "You'll get used to it. He's just being friendly." That night, I told my wife what she'd said. She didn't take it well. She wanted to move out immediately. But we'd just signed the lease, and I didn't want to believe something supernatural was happening. Still, the knocks kept coming, every night, around the same time between 11:30 and midnight, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to rattle the picture frames. Once, I decided to test it. I brought a flashlight to the wall and knocked 5 times in a slow rhythm. The response came from inside the wall, perfectly timed, perfectly spaced. I pressed my ear to the plaster. For a moment, I heard what sounded like breathing, shallow, deliberate. When I stepped back, something else knocked this time from the far end of the room. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, I ran into the landlord outside. He was an older guy who owned both units. When I brought up the knocking again, he sighed. "That side's been empty since Mrs. Bailey passed," he said. I blinked. "Passed? You mean the woman who used to live there?" He nodded. "Yeah. Her husband died years ago. She stayed after him. Said she could still feel him in the house. Then one day she stopped answering calls. They found her sitting by the wall handprint on the plaster, like she'd been touching it before she went. I remember my stomach dropping. But I just saw her. She was outside watering her plants." The landlord frowned. "Son, that place has been empty for 6 months." I didn't argue. I just went back inside and locked every door. That night, I heard the knocking again. It started soft, then grew louder, faster. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it at the wall, and then clear as day, 5 knocks, the exact rhythm I'd done days earlier. My wife screamed. We backed away, but the sound followed, moving down the wall, toward the kitchen, then across the ceiling. It was like something was crawling through the bones of the house. We heard the pipes groan, the floorboards shift. Then, from behind the drywall, came the sound of a woman's voice. It wasn't clear at first, muffled, distant, like someone trying to speak through water. But the tone was unmistakable, pleading, soft, calling a name. I leaned closer. "Hello?" The wall knocked once, then again, and then, with a kind of dreadful intelligence, it spelled something out, slow, deliberate knocks following each pause. I realized after a few seconds what it was doing. It was spelling my name. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The knocking stopped. For a long moment, the silence felt worse than the sound. Then, from the other side of the wall, came one final knock. Long, slow, heavy, like a goodbye. The next morning, I went to check the other side of the duplex. The door was padlocked, but the window by the front was cracked open just enough to peek inside. The rooms were empty. Dust thick on the counters, the air stale, but right along the shared wall, I could see faint handprints pressed into the paint, like someone had been standing there, waiting. That was the last night we stayed in that house. We packed up and left by evening. A few weeks later, I drove by out of curiosity. The landlord had new tenants moving in. A young couple, probably around our age. They were laughing as they carried boxes inside. And as I slowed past, I saw the woman pause by the wall, tilting her head like she'd heard something. Then she laughed and knocked twice. A moment later, she froze, because 2 knocks came right back. I've been a delivery driver for nearly 12 years now, UPS, mostly suburban routes. You get to know the rhythm of a neighborhood. Who orders what? Which houses have dogs that bark at the door? Which people never answer no matter how many times you ring? Most days are routine, the kind of repetition that keeps you comfortably numb. But there's one house, one stop I can't forget. It was mid-October, one of those crisp afternoons when the air smells faintly of rain and dead leaves. The sky was low and gray. and my scanner said I had one last drop on Sycamore Drive before heading back. I remember feeling grateful it was almost quitting time. The house was a small, tidy place at the end of the cul-de-sac. White siding, blue shutters, a little porch with wind chimes that tinkled in the breeze. I delivered there before a man named Harold McKinney. Always polite, always waiting at the door when I pulled up, like he didn't want me to have to ring. When I stepped out of the truck that day, the first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. No cars passing, no lawn mowers, not even birds. Just that faint, metallic sound of the chimes. I carried the box up to the porch and knocked. After a few seconds, I heard shuffling from inside. Then the door creaked open just a few inches. There he was, Mr. McKinney. Thin, gray hair combed neatly, glasses perched on his nose. He looked older than I remembered, maybe paler, but his eyes were clear. He smiled faintly. "You're right on time," he said. I handed him the tablet. "Need a signature, sir." He took it, his hand trembling slightly as he scribbled his name. "I've been waiting for this," he said softly, almost to himself. When he handed the scanner back, I noticed something that made me pause. His hand felt cold, too cold, like touching metal that's been left out in the wind. "Everything all right, Mr. McKinney?" I asked. He smiled again, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Yes, thank you for bringing it. My wife's been waiting too." That struck me as odd. His wife had died 2 years ago, I remembered, because the neighborhood had put out condolence cards back then. But I didn't say anything. People in grief talk in strange ways sometimes. "Have a good evening," I said. He nodded. "You too. Drive safe." I walked back to the truck, glanced in the mirror once, and saw him still standing there, holding the box, just standing, watching me drive away. The next morning, when I came down Sycamore again, I knew something was wrong before I even turned the corner. Police cars lined the street. The house had yellow tape around it. Neighbors stood in small clusters, whispering. I slowed the truck, flagged down one of the officers I recognized from another route. "What happened?" I asked. He frowned. "Old guy in that house, McKinney. Neighbor found him this morning. Been dead about 3 days. I blinked. "That's impossible. I just delivered to him yesterday. He signed for a package." The officer's eyebrows knitted. "Yesterday?" "Yeah," I said. "About 4:30. He answered the door himself. The cop shook his head. "No way. Medical examiner says he's been gone a while. Maybe you dropped the package and someone else picked it up?" "No," I said quietly. "He signed." He stared at me for a moment, then sighed. "Well, the body was in the living room. Nobody else lived there." I didn't know what to say. He walked off, leaving me there with my stomach in knots. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the moment the door creaking open, his cold hand, the sound of his voice when he said, "My wife's been waiting too." It was too vivid to be a trick of memory. I even checked the scanner history later that evening. The signature was right there, clear as day. H. McKinney. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back, parked down the block, and walked over on foot. The tape was gone now, but the blinds were still drawn tight. A faint smell of something chemical drifted from the open window, probably disinfectant from the cleanup. On the porch, the wind chimes rattled softly, and there, right by the door, was the package, still sealed, still sitting exactly where I'd left it. The signature in the system, the one I watched him write, was somehow recorded, but the parcel had never been taken inside. That night, I dreamed of him. He was sitting in his living room chair, that same box on his lap, his head tilted slightly, his glasses reflecting the TV glow. And beside him, on the couch, was a woman in a floral dress. I couldn't see her face, but I could hear her whispering, "Tell him thank you for bringing it." I woke drenched in sweat. The next day, I tried to shake it off. People grieve in strange ways, I told myself again. Maybe someone forged the signature. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks wrong. Except a week later, dispatch sent a new delivery ticket. Same address. Same name. I froze. That can't be right, I told my supervisor. He's dead, she frowned. Well, it's in the system. Return shipment. Prepaid. Just drop it at the usual spot. I shouldn't have gone. I knew better. But something pulled me back. When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same, curtains drawn. Yard still, wind chimes whispering. I climbed the porch steps and saw the old box sitting there again. Except this time, it had been opened. The inside was empty except for a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. Thank you for delivering this. We can rest now. Below the words was a faint, smeared fingerprint, brownish red, like dried blood. I left the note where I found it, turned, and walked back to my truck without looking behind me. As I pulled away, I glanced once in the mirror. The front door was open, and standing there, side by side, were Mr. and Mrs. McKinney, both pale as smoke, both watching me go. The next morning, dispatch rerouted Sycamore Drive to another driver. I never asked why, but sometimes, when I'm out late, driving the quiet back roads at dusk, I swear I still hear faint wind chimes when there shouldn't be any breeze. And every now and then, my scanner glitches. The screen flashes a delivery name I haven't seen in years. H. McKinney, out for delivery. When I first moved into the duplex on Green Hollow Road, I thought I'd finally found a quiet corner of the world. I'm a night owl, so I liked the fact that the street was dead after dark, no cars rushing past, no bars or traffic, just the sound of crickets and the occasional train in the distance. My bedroom was on the second floor, with a window facing the neighboring unit. From up there, I could see the opposite window, clearly a single square of glass framed by peeling white trim. At night it was usually dark, until one evening, about a week after I moved in. I'd just finished unpacking and was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling on my phone, when something made me glance up. Across the narrow gap between our houses, in that window, someone was standing there, a man. He was backlit by a dim yellow lamp, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark sweater. His hands rested on the sill. His face was turned directly toward me, eyes fixed on my window. I jerked my curtains shut, heart kicking against my ribs. I told myself it was nothing, just a curious neighbor noticing the new tenant. People stare. Maybe he was just looking out at the night, and our eyes accidentally met. But the next night, he was there again. Same window, same posture, same motionless stare. It became a pattern every night, between midnight and 3 a.m., when the street was silent and the only sound was the occasional hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I'd glance up and see him there, completely still, completely focused. His face was pale in the low light, his eyes like two dark pits. At first, I tried to ignore it. I stopped looking at the window. I shut my curtains, but that only made it worse. I could feel it, his eyes on me, even through the fabric. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone was standing just outside, waiting. 2 weeks in, I started timing him. I'd peek through the smallest crack in the curtain at random intervals. Midnight? There. 1:30 a.m.? Still there. 3 a.m.? Still there. He never moved. He never blinked. It got so I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps. One night, just before 2, I decided to test him. I reached out and waved. Not a big wave, just a small flick of the hand, like you'd do to a neighbor you've finally decided to acknowledge. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, something changed. His head tilted just slightly to one side, like a dog hearing a sound you can't. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. That was the first time I felt real fear. I started asking around. The next morning, I caught the landlord as he was fixing a gutter out front. I told him I wanted to know who was renting the other side of the duplex. He gave me a puzzled look. "Other side's empty," he said. "Has been for years." "No," I said. "There's a man living there. Tall, thin, dark hair. He's at the window every night." The landlord frowned and shook his head. "Son, no one's rented that unit since before I owned the property. Needs work, black mold, bad wiring. Nobody's in there." I just stared at him. "Then who have I been seeing?" He shrugged and went back to his ladder. That night, I sat up in bed with all the lights off, phone in my hand, waiting. At 12:15 a.m., right on schedule, I cracked the curtain. He was there. This time, the lamp behind him wasn't on. The room was dark. And yet, I could still see him, his pale face hovering in the blackness, faint but clear, like a photograph burned into the glass. I raised my phone to take a picture. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The camera flash went off, lighting up my room for a split second. When the screen cleared, the window across the way was empty. I sat there, staring at the dark square of glass. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then, just as I lowered my phone, something moved. Not in the window. In my room. A faint creak of floorboards behind me. The kind of sound you only hear when someone shifts their weight. The smell of old wood, damp and sour, rolled through the air. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the window, he was there again, closer this time. His face pressed against the glass, lips moving. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I pulled the curtain shut and didn't open it again. By morning, I'd decided I was done. I started packing, calling friends, looking for somewhere else to stay. But something made me go next door first. The landlord had left the other unit unlocked for repairs. I stepped inside. The air was heavy and stale, smelling of mildew and dust. The floors were warped, wallpaper peeling. It was obvious no one had lived there for years. I went upstairs. The carpet was so damp it squished under my shoes. When I reached the bedroom, the one with the window facing mine, the door was already open. Inside was nothing but bare walls and an old wooden chair by the window. The chair was turned toward my house. On the sill, etched deep into the wood, were scratches. Over and over, the same words carved by a trembling hand. "I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep." I backed out of that room slowly, never taking my eyes off the chair. When I got back home, I slammed my curtain shut and started shoving clothes into a bag. That night was my last in the duplex. I slept on the couch with all the lights on, waiting for the sun to rise. At some point near dawn, I drifted off. When I woke up, the curtains were open, and on my windowsill, pressed into the wood, were 4 fresh fingerprints, long and thin, as if someone had been standing there all night, watching me sleep. I'd only been living in that building for about 6 weeks when I first heard the voice. The place was old, one of those crumbling apartment houses built in the 1940s, with too many hallways, thin walls, and the faint smell of old water pipes that never quite goes away. I rented the top-floor studio. The building wasn't much to look at, but the rent was cheap, and the view of the city from my window made it worth it. There were 6 other tenants, most of them older, the kind who still checked their mail every morning like clockwork. The apartment directly beneath mine, the basement unit, belonged to an old man named Mr. Hendricks. Everyone in the building knew him. He'd been there longer than anyone else. Quiet man, polite, always wore the same brown cardigan no matter the weather. I'd only spoken to him a couple of times, once when I moved in, and once when I accidentally got his mail. He thanked me with a smile, then said something that stuck with me. "Basement's the heart of a house," he told me. "Everything starts and ends down there." I just laughed politely and went back upstairs. A few weeks later, I started hearing him at night. It began faintly, just a muffled hum, a man's voice drifting up through the floorboards. At first, I thought he was talking to someone on the phone. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it didn't sound like a conversation. He was arguing. His tone rose and fell in bursts, angry one moment, pleading the next. I couldn't make out every word, but I could tell by the cadence that it was heated. I remember hearing him shout, "You shouldn't be here!" followed by a low, whispery voice I couldn't quite catch. It went on for hours. By morning, everything was quiet again. It became a routine. Every few nights, around 1 or 2 a.m., I'd wake to the sound of Mr. Hendricks arguing with someone down there. Sometimes I'd hear something fall, a chair scraping, a door slamming. I thought about knocking, maybe checking on him, but it didn't feel like my place. Then, one morning, the landlord came by. He was taping a notice to the door downstairs when I passed him in the hallway. "Everything all right?" I asked. He sighed and said, "Mr. Hendricks passed away. Found him down there 2 days ago." I froze. 2 days ago? He nodded. "Heart failure, poor guy. Died sitting in his chair." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at him, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. "But that can't be right," I said finally. "I heard him last night. He was arguing with someone down there." The landlord frowned. "You sure it wasn't the TV?" "I'm sure," I said. It was his voice. He gave me a sympathetic look, like I was the one losing it. "That basement apartment's been locked since Sunday. Nobody's been in there since the coroner left." He patted my shoulder and left, leaving me standing there with my skin crawling. That night, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Grief does strange things to memory, even when it's not your own. Maybe I'd heard echoes. Maybe the pipes carried sound from another unit. But when the clock hit 1:23 a.m., I heard it again. A man's voice. Low, muttering, coming from directly beneath me. My stomach dropped. I turned off my TV, held my breath, and listened. It was Mr. Hendricks. The same gravelly tone, the same rhythm. He was angry this time, his words clipped, sharp. "I told you to stay in your room!" he snapped. Then came another sound, a second voice, softer, childlike, whispering. I couldn't make out what it said, but it made my skin prickle. I grabbed my phone and texted the landlord right then. "There's someone in the basement." No reply. I waited, staring at the ceiling, listening as the argument grew louder. Furniture scraping, something slamming hard against the wall. Then, silence, dead silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found the landlord outside again. I told him everything, every sound, every voice. He just shook his head and said, "I checked the locks, still sealed. Nobody's been down there." He must have seen the disbelief on my face because he handed me the spare key. "If you want to check for yourself, go ahead. But I'm telling you, that place is empty." So I did. That afternoon, I went down to the basement door. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of concrete and mildew. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked like it hadn't been used in decades. The apartment inside was small and dim. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Dust covered every surface. The chair where Mr. Hendricks had died was still there, positioned near a table with 2 teacups. One of them was cracked. There were no signs of anyone else, no intruder, no second tenant, nothing. But what got me was the wall. On the far side of the room, one patch of concrete looked different, darker, damp. The air around it felt colder. When I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't just a wall. It was a door, or had been. The outline of a frame was still visible beneath layers of plaster, sealed up long ago. And pressed into that plaster, clear as day, were handprints. Small ones. A child's. I stumbled back so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. That's when I heard it again. A voice, whispering, right behind me. It was faint, but unmistakable. A man's voice, low and strained, saying, "Don't let her out." I bolted. I don't even remember running up the stairs or locking the door behind me. That night, I packed a bag and slept in my car. The next morning, the landlord called. Said he'd gone down to the basement after me and noticed something strange. The dust on the table, 2 sets of cup rings instead of 1. Fresh. He laughed it off nervously. Said maybe I'd just stirred things up when I went down there. But when I turned my phone over later that night, I saw a new text message waiting. No number attached. Just a blank sender field. The message said, "Thank you for letting me out. I moved out the next day." A week later, I drove past the old building out of morbid curiosity. The basement light was on again. For the first time, I saw movement through the narrow window near the ground, a shadow pacing back and forth. And then, as I slowed the car, someone stepped into view, an old man in a brown cardigan. He looked straight up at me and smiled. And from somewhere deeper inside, faint but unmistakable, came a second voice, a child's laugh. "Hi. I just want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for being here. Your support means more than words can ever express. Every view, every like, every comment, it all helps keep this channel alive and growing. If you've enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. I'd also love to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comment section, and let me know where you're watching from. Hearing your stories and seeing the places you all come from is one of the best parts of this community. Thank you again for being part of this journey with me.